What do you want?
Bring me some Reefers. Play something.
During Easter break in 1986, two 19-year-olds walked into Mary Earle's house in Burien, Washington to use her 4-track TIAC A2340 reel-to-reel tape recorder. They brought with them a set of dark, aggressive, in-your-face songs, which ranged anywhere from punk to sludge to noise rock. These kids were Kurt Cobain and Dale Crover of the Melvins. What they recorded would set in motion a chain of events that eventually would lead to the formation of Nirvana. This is the definitive history and tone analysis of Fecal Matter and their almost mythical tape, Illiteracy Will Prevail. Fecal Matter was Kurt Cobain's first band, formed in early 1985 after he dropped out of Aberdeen High School. The first formation of this band was Kurt on guitar and vocals, Dale on bass, and Greg Hokanson on drums. They would initially rehearse in Hokason's bedroom, but mainly instrumental as they had no PA. Some recordings of these rehearsals were made on Crover's boombox, but none of them have surfaced. At the time of recording this video in 2023, the only information we have about these recordings is that they are heavily distorted. The band spent months rehearsing original material and covers by the Ramones, Led Zeppelin, and Jimi Hendrix. In December 1985, this formation of Fecal Matter played its one and only show at Spot Tavern in Pacific Beach, Washington, supporting the Melvins. Hokanson left the band in early 1986. Kurt and Dale continued to practice as a two-piece, writing and rehearsing material that they were going to record using Kurt's Aunt Mary's tape recorder. Kurt had already used her house as a makeshift studio. 4 years prior, in 1982, he recorded what is believed to be his very first recordings, a demo tape that he called Organized Confusion. That tape consists of him singing, playing guitar, playing his aunt's bass, and hitting an empty suitcase with wooden spoons. Earl had offered to show him how to use her computer drum machine, but Kurt said, "I want to keep my music pure," and opted instead for the suitcase. Nothing from this tape has surfaced, besides a few brief seconds that were heard in the Kurt and Courtney documentary.
Did he record it on that machine too?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Oh.
So we can hear a little bit of it here. Do you want to
Sure, no, just play it.
just play it?
Yeah. Courtney Love has threatened legal action, so I removed the song.
Here is how Earl recalls the tape.
Most of what I remember about the songs was a lot of distortion on guitar, really heavy bass, and the clunky sound of the wooden spoons. The hollow sound of the empty Samsonite suitcase and thudding of wooden spoons gave it a very primal sound. Along with his low, muffled vocals and occasional blood-curdling screams, it had all the raw ingredients that would eventually concoct the Nirvana sound.
Earl agreed to let her nephew use her tape recorder once again. So in early 1986, she welcomed Kurt and Dale in and gave them free rein to record. The duo recorded for 2 days. Of these sessions, Mary recalls,
They set up in my music room and they'd just crank it up. It was loud. They would put down the music tracks first. Then he'd put the headphones on and all you could hear was Kurt Cobain's voice screaming through the house. It was pretty wild. My husband and I, we just look at each other and smile and go, "You think we should close the window so the neighbors don't hear? So they don't think we're beating him or something?"
with Kurt on vocals and guitar and Dale on drums and bass, they recorded 13 songs. Dale has said that he recorded bass because they did not have a left-handed bass that Kurt could use. It's very hard to categorize these songs. Kurt would later say the songs were totally abrasive and reflected his dual interest of Black Sabbath and Black Flag. There are songs you could call punk.
Are you control? I love my wife. I have the brethren shooting bars survive.
Others you could call metal. And somewhere it's both at the same time, or something in between. The songwriting is all over the place, but not necessarily in a bad way. It shows that Kurt was discovering who he was as a writer, experimenting with various different styles and influences. Kurt's voice sounds strained throughout the tape, and you would think that's maybe him just being inexperienced at that point and still learning how to use his voice. But Dale has said that it's because Kurt was sick with a cold while they were recording. That's why you can hear him coughing on several tracks. Proud of what he made, Kurt began passing around homemade copies of the tape to his friends. He drew the artwork and wrote out the track listing by hand on every copy. He also listed Kurt as guitar/mouth and Dale as drums/bass. With the information that we have available to us, let's now break down what gear Kurt used on the tape. For guitar, we have 3 guesses as to what he could have possibly used. First, there is his very first guitar, that is only ever referred to as a Lindell electric guitar. He got this in 1981 on his 14th birthday from his uncle Chuck Friedenberg. With it, his uncle also gave him his first amp, an unknown 10-watt amp that could have potentially been used on the tape too. Next, there is his second guitar, which is thought to be either a Tesco FB29M or Ibanez Destroyer. Kurt bought this guitar after it was recommended to him by his guitar teacher, Warren Mason. Mason saw Kurt's first guitar and said it was too difficult to play, and pointed him in the direction of this guitar. This is a photo of Kurt playing it in 1982 at his Aunt Mary's house, which makes it extremely likely that this guitar was used on the Organized Confusion tape. Our third guess, and the option that I think makes the most sense, is this. What is thought to be his first Univox, a 70s Phase 3 high flyer. This iconic photo of him playing it in his room in Aberdeen is thought to have been taken in 1986, which would then fit the timeline for him using it on Illiteracy Will Prevail. For my tone recreation that you've been hearing in the background of this video, I used my Eastwood Phase 4 high flyer. This is a Univox copy. It's Eastwood's replica of the high flyer Kurt used in the heart-shaped box music video. We know even less about what amp was used and if one was even used at all, so we are left to guess again. From what I gathered, it could be one of these 3 options. First is Kurt's first amp, the previously mentioned unknown 10-watt amp. Second is a 70s 2x12 PV amp. Kurt'sEquipment.com says this was one of Kurt's first amps and that Kurt favored the PV. It also says that this was the amp that he formed Fecal Matter with in 1985. Third is that no amp was used at all, and that Kurt plugged straight into the tape recorder itself. I personally think that this is the most likely option, considering the guitar's clipped and seemingly direct sound, and also based off of these 2 quotes from Dale. While recalling the recording process, Dale has said,
"I don't even think that Kurt had a guitar amp. I think that he went direct into the tape recorder. I can't remember quite how he did that."
And in a different interview, Dale talks about how after he met Kurt, the Melvins briefly considered asking him to join, but they ultimately didn't because he didn't have an amp at the time. Now that is a crazy what-if scenario to consider. What if Kurt had joined the Melvins and Nirvana was never formed? Just imagine all the Nirvana songs we know today, having been co-written with Buzz and having his input on it, and now being Melvin songs. Buzz is hugely influential and a genius in his own right, so it's a crazy thought to think of him co-writing songs with Kurt. Songs like Breed and Negative Creep, how would they have sounded? For my recreation, I'm using my Fender Tone Master Twin Reverb. These are my settings. Another interesting memory that Dale has shared is that at one point Kurt accidentally recorded over a section of a song. He was initially very frustrated, but then he said, "Wait, I know," and plugged his guitar directly into the tape recorder, and recorded what Dale described as a crazy Paul Leary style solo to cover up the section he had accidentally erased. Dale couldn't recall which song this was, but I'm confident that he's referring to this section of the song that's referred to as either Class of '86 or Buffy's Pregnant. The only piece of gear that we can say with some confidence that Kurt used is the Univox FY6 Super Fuzz. Kurt'sEquipment.com has it listed and says that it was used before bleach. The tone we hear is arguably that famous and sought-after Super Fuzz sound. Vintage Univox Super Fuzz pedals are collector's items today that go for insane prices. There are many copies and clones of it, and I went with what is probably the cheapest copy. This $30 Behringer Super Fuzz SF300. Don't let the price fool you though. This is an absolute steal of a pedal that can get you monster fuzz sounds. It's a clone of the Boss FZ2 Hyper Fuzz, which itself is a clone of the Univox Super Fuzz. So it's a second generation clone, but it can get you in the ballpark of a Univox Super Fuzz tone. Its dedicated treble and bass EQ knobs actually give you more control than the more expensive Super Fuzz clones. There are 3 modes on it: Fuzz 1, Fuzz 2, and Boost. But there's also a secret Fuzz 1.5 mode. If you carefully put the slider in between 1 and 2, you'll get a combination of both. This secret mode is what I found to be the closest to Kurt's bitey Fecal Matter tone. I can't say that there is one setting on this pedal that will get you the tone of the entire tape. The EQ on the guitar varies from track to track, so you'll have to adjust accordingly. These are my settings for Sound of Dentage that you heard in the beginning of this video, and these are my settings for Laminated effect, which you are hearing now. This pedal and parts and gear that Kurt used are available in my Amazon storefront. My storefront will be linked here and in the video description. My buddy and Nirvana gear expert John helped me immeasurably when it came to finding info about what gear Kurt could have possibly used on the tape. Huge shout out to him for all the help and all the tips. Sometime in 1986, after recording the tape, the band's lineup changed once again, with King Buzzo of the Melvins now on bass and original Melvins drummer Mike Dillard on drums. This formation lasted briefly. Kurt was frustrated that Buzz would not buy a bass amp, which he took as Buzz not taking the band seriously. Fecal Matter came to an end that same year, while the Melvins went on to support their debut EP, 6 Songs. Even though the band had ended, Kurt continued to hand out copies of the tape. One fell in the hands of his acquaintance, Chris Novoselic. At Mopop in Seattle, there is a letter from Buzz to Chris that's dated April 16, 1986. In it, Buzz says,
Cobain and Dale went up to his aunt's house and made a tape of some of Kurt's songs. I was pretty impressed. Some of his songs are real killer despite the poor sound quality. It sounds good, but could have sounded better with a little more time. Nevertheless, it's still a great demo. I think he could have a future in music if he keeps at it.
Chris was the older brother of Kurt's friend and classmate Robert Novoselic. Once when Kurt was over at the Novoselic house, he heard loud music coming from upstairs. Robert said, "That's my older brother, he listens to punk rock." After befriending Chris, Kurt wanted to collaborate musically with him for some time, but it seemed like it would never happen. It took Chris nearly a year to listen to Illiteracy Will Prevail, but when he finally did, he was impressed with what he heard. He particularly liked the song Spank Thru. He liked it enough to agree to start a band with Kurt, and thus forming the very beginnings of Nirvana.
Dale Crover, the drummer for the Melvins, and I made a demo and at my aunt's house on a 4-track. And I had the tape for about a year or so. And I was always trying to push it on my friends, you know, to try to get them into starting a band with me. And one day Chris, after probably hearing it a few times, just decided, hey, this is pretty good, you know. So finally, the hint worked, you know.
As of 2023, the only officially released track from the tape is Spank Thru, which was released on the Sliver Best of the Box album. Spank Thru, Downer, and a reworked version of Anorexorcist went on to become Nirvana songs, while all the other tracks were destined to only live on this demo. While it's not been officially released, it's been bootlegged and is relatively easy to find in full. I personally don't understand how almost 30 years after the end of Nirvana that this still hasn't been fully released. It may not be pristine studio quality, but it's an important and fascinating document of some of Kurt's very first songs and recordings. I think it would be mind-blowing if the powers that be released some sort of box set that looked like this. Call it something like Kurt Cobain, The Lost Early Recordings. Disc 1, the complete organized Confusion demo. Disc 2, the complete Fecal Matter tape. Disc 3, every rehearsal recording that exists of Fecal Matter. And Disc 4, just to round it out, put Nirvana's May 1987 Chaos radio session. This is Nirvana's first professionally recorded performance, and it includes the 3 songs that started out on Illiteracy Will Prevail. And then to top it off, throw in a booklet that opens with a foreword by Dale, talking about what he remembers from recording the Fecal Matter tape. I don't know about you, but this is something that I would pre-order in a heartbeat. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Nirvana Guitars, and to subscribe and check out my other Nirvana gear videos right here on YouTube.